Morning, everyone. At the caucus meeting that just concluded, our focus was on the president's budget. We had a presentation from Bob Greenstein on the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. I had a very robust discussion about President Trump's latest assault on the American dream. President Trump's budget is reckless, regressive, and retrograde, and is a declaration of war on the American dream. President Trump's budget is a declaration of war on working families, middle-class folks, senior citizens, the poor, the sick, the afflicted, the least, the lost, and the left behind. Once again, the president has shown the American people that at the end of the day, he's all about elevating the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and everybody else is left to fend for themselves. As our vice chair will detail, what we've seen is a budget with over $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, $500 billion in cuts to Medicare, tens of billions in cuts to Social Security, disability assistance, about $180 billion in cuts to food assistance, and approximately $170 billion in cuts to college affordability programs, including the freezing of Pell Grants. This is a president who just came before the American people last week and said he cares about everyday Americans. President Trump is lying, and the budget is Exhibit A, that he does not care about everyday Americans. President Trump cares about himself, and he cares about the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. And that is what this regressive budget makes clear for the American people in stunning fashion. Let me now yield to our Vice Chair, Katherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the chairman said, for the fourth year in a row, President Trump has released a budget that decimates programs that support Americans and lifts up our neediest citizens. In particular, this quote that we have here from the State of the Union, just on February 4th, "We will always protect your Medicare. We will always protect your Social Security, always." Followed up by a tweet on February 8th. "We will not be touching your Social Security or Medicare in the fiscal 2021 budget." What do we see in the budget? We see the exact opposite. $500 billion in cuts to Medicare, $24 billion taken out of Social Security, $920 billion taken out of Medicaid, additional cuts to the ACA. That is trillions taken away from health care for Americans. Specifically with Medicaid, that is $1 trillion taken away from low and medium income families. Medicaid is how we help our aging parents find care in their latter years. It is how we help children. It is how we help people struggling with addiction and substance use disorders. What is it offset by? It is offset by a $1.4 trillion extension of the tax cuts for the wealthy. There is a fundamental mistruth in this budget, and that is that President Trump and this administration cares about everyday working families in this country. The list goes on, whether it's low-income heating assistance, capital funds for housing that are wiped out, cuts to NIH, elimination of legal services, Pell Grants, student loans, another $1.7 billion taken out of how we help our students. Budgets are always a roadmap of our values, and this one clearly shows that this president and his administration's values remain clearly with those who have already achieved great wealth and power at the expense of everyday Americans.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions?
Sure. So this is something that you guys can prevent from becoming law. I understand that why you're highlighting it, because it's what the president wants to do. But after the impeachment, there are other things that he is still doing that I don't think you approve of. Some of your colleagues wrote a letter about the Impoundment Control Act in Puerto Rico. That money hasn't gone out. We hear about Rudy Giuliani sending information into the Justice Department. Is there anything you can do to deal with these other things that you don't approve of?
Well, the House Democratic Caucus is the only thing standing between the American people and Donald Trump's slash and burn budget. That's the most important dynamic that is in play right now. The president has given us a roadmap for what he wants to do with the budget as it relates to everyday Americans. That's as serious as it gets. The president and his administration, of course, are also engaged in all manner of shenanigans to undermine the integrity of our democracy, break laws, and continue to behave as if he prefers an autocratic form of government. Those are all problems that we, as House Democrats, continue to deal with, in part through our legislative authority and in part through our oversight authority. And Speaker Pelosi has continued to make clear that as a separate and co-equal branch of government, we will continue to aggressively pursue our oversight responsibilities whenever and wherever possible. But fundamentally, at this point in time, the most important thing that we as House Democrats can continue to do is keep our focus on kitchen table pocketbook issues. Deal with the fact that President Trump is lying to the American people in real time. His own budget is a fact check on the president's misrepresentations. This is extraordinary stuff. And we're going to continue to point it out to the American people.
Are you at all concerned that since President Trump has been acquitted, he's actually become more emboldened with the firing of two people who testified, with the higher approval ratings, with taking a victory lap? Do you feel like he is actually emboldened now that he's acquitted?
Seems to me that that's a question which is an important one, but it's probably best directed at people like Susan Collins. She said that the president has learned his lesson. Those were her words. And then the next morning, President Trump went out and disgraced himself before people of faith at the National Prayer Breakfast. And then President Trump turned around and held a Make America Hate Again rally in the White House, where he attacked patriots and others. And then, of course, the next day engaged in an extraordinary form of presidential retaliation, perhaps never before seen in the history of the Republic. And so it's a great question that you've asked, and I'd like to hear the answer from Senator Susan Collins and others who chose to vote to acquit President Trump in the face of a mountain of evidence that they admitted existed, proving that President Trump engaged in a corrupt abuse of power.
Jumping off that question, some Democrat voters have expressed concerns that impeachment has only helped President Trump. Are you worried that impeachment could endanger the House Democrat majority in 2020?
House Democrats are continuing to focus on kitchen table pocketbook issues such as protecting more than 100 million Americans who have their health care at risk of being snatched away because the president wants to do away with the existing protections for those with pre-existing conditions. We want to lower health care costs. We want to focus on driving down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. We work with this president whenever and wherever possible, such as delivering to the American people a vastly improved U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And we're going to disagree with him when we need to disagree, when he's trying to devastate the American dream, as President Trump is doing in the context of the budget. One last observation on that. So there was polling, as I understand it, and then I'm going to yield to Catherine. Polling, as I understand it, post-verdict in the Senate, Joe Biden beating Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders beating Donald Trump, Amy Klobuchar beating Donald Trump, Pete Buttigieg beating Donald Trump, Michael Bloomberg beating Donald Trump. Had they thrown Catherine Clark in there, she would have beat Donald Trump. That's the answer to the question.
I'll just add Elizabeth Warren beats Donald Trump, too. But I do want to say that this budget and what we saw yesterday coming out of the White House makes the point for the urgency of retaining the majority in the House. And our members in this caucus have been going home over the last year and making that case. The 400 bills that we've passed, the overwhelming majority that remain on Mitch McConnell's desk collecting dust. These are issues that matter to people. These are issues that affect their lives. And we have always been able to do both, and we have no regrets about standing up for truth and the Constitution in impeachment. But that has never slowed us down from our work on health care and expanding access, on making sure women get paid equally when they do equal work, making sure that we have common sense gun safety laws in this country that we passed, rooting out corruption, raising the minimum wage for people, making sure that people with pre-existing conditions are not priced out of their health care. And what we see from this president is that he is not afraid. And now he has the backing of almost all the senators, except for one, in saying, whatever it takes for your reelection, you go for it. And we will put aside the Constitution, we will put aside the law, we will put aside ethics and integrity and values to support you in that. But we're here as House Democrats to say, no, we won't. No, we won't. We're going to stick up for those families at home. We know that health care continues to be the number one issue on people's minds. And we are going to continue to highlight this administration's deep hypocrisy and lies about what they are doing. They are in court today taking away the ACA. Their budget yesterday had extreme cuts to the ACA. If they are serious about protecting people with pre-existing conditions, they are headed down a very wrong path. Medicaid, we know what it means to low-income families, but it's also middle-income families, like I said earlier, that have come to depend on it for how we take care of aging parents, how we take care of children. And this administration wants to say, you can have a junk plan. That will lower your premium costs. Not a single one of those plans that is offered covers maternal health. This is not what the American people are looking for, and they realize that it's House Democrats that are fighting for them. Look at where this budget puts the values of this president, and it is a clear path for House Democrats and the strength that we will show in the polls in November.
Back row.
Thank you. You mentioned the recent polling with the president and several candidates in the race. Last week, expectations of turnout in Iowa fell short of expectations in terms of caucus participation. What do you both make of that, going into the election and as it relates to maintaining the majority?
Well, I was responding to an appropriate question, but I don't want to go too deep into the political side of the equation here in the Capitol, other than to say that it's important for every single American to get out and to vote as if your life depends on it, because your quality of life does depend on it, as Catherine has illustrated in such a compelling way here today. Everything is at stake in November. Medicare is on the ballot in November. Social Security is on the ballot in November. Protecting people with pre-existing conditions is on the ballot in November. Decency is on the ballot in November. The Constitution is on the ballot in November It is my hope that every single American, Democrats, Republicans, independents, swing voters, traditional voters, non-voters, all come out in November because it matters.
Senator Jeffries, what did you think of Attorney General Barr's statement that he's established an intake process at Justice Department to possibly accept information from Rudy Giuliani on things going on in Ukraine, possibly affecting the Bidens?
It's problematic, and it's another example that the Trump administration continues to brazenly attempt to interfere in the 2020 election and cheat in order to enhance the president's capacity to take another 4 years at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That is the heart of the impeachment matter that we just fully litigated before the American people, and yet the effort continues. And again, I don't want to look backward because we're focused on looking forward. But reasonable Americans have to ask the question, why is Rudolph Giuliani involved? He's a failed mayor, a failed presidential candidate, and now a failed lawyer. He's an embarrassment. Rudolph Giuliani is not a member of the diplomatic corps. He is not an ambassador. He is not the Secretary of State. Why is he engaging in fake diplomacy? It's because he is doing the political bidding of the president. That is why the president was impeached for corruptly abusing his power, and yet it continues. But this is all now in the hands of the American people to decide what they should do with the wrongdoing that is hiding in plain sight.
After the Iowa caucuses last week, a couple members of your caucus have called for Tom Perez to resign. Do you guys have any comment on that?
I don't know. No.
So you have the Trump budget. Meanwhile, you have a bunch of your Democratic candidates in New Hampshire who are offering radically different visions from each other as far as what to do about deficits, government spending, these various programs that the president is cutting. Does that hamper your ability to present a unified front against the president's plans in the budget?
Well, let me yield to Catherine, who has done a tremendous amount of work in this area as a member of our Appropriations Committee. But I think every single Democrat within Congress, certainly the members of the House Democratic Caucus, are focused on trying to make life better for the people. We're focused on trying to make life better for working families, for middle-class folks, for senior citizens, for young people starting out in pursuit of the American dream, and for older Americans who deserve to retire with grace and dignity. That is our focus as House Democrats, and I believe that is the center of gravity as it relates to all of those individuals who seek to be our nominee.
I would just say that we are aligned both as candidates and as House Democrats, and that we understand what is at stake for the American people, the deep concerns about health care. And in administration, we will not soon forget, right after the House vote to take away health care from millions and millions of Americans, the celebration in the Rose Garden. That continues today. They may not have the champagne corks popping, but they have put into their budget the same values, that it's about increasing the wealth of the wealthy and making sure that American people don't get a fair shot. That's all people are asking for. Give me a fair shot. Give me a good working broadband in rural areas of this country. Make sure that farmers can plant and have some knowledge that trade agreements aren't going to totally upend what they're doing. Let's look and strengthen our unions and working people like we did last week with the PRO Act. Let's expand health care for everyone. Let's make sure that we are investing in our infrastructure, that we're looking at childcare, which can be more expensive than college for families with young children, and that we do our part to make sure not only can they go to work knowing their children are going to be well cared for, but that we can have that early education benefit to every single child in this country. These are the issues that unite us. And what the Republicans have shown and Donald Trump has shown is that he wins by dividing. So whatever candidate and the nuances of the difference, it is clear. Democrats are on the side of families, of the poor, of the median income, and hardworking families of this country. And we are not going to be taken in because once again, Donald Trump shows us almost every single day who he is and whose side he's on. It is clearly Donald Trump. That's who he works for, himself. And we are here and we are united with our candidates saying there's a better way. We can reclaim this government and make it work for people again.
Back row. Lindsay.
Since House Democrats aren't doing a budget resolution this year, is there any plans as a caucus to come up with something ahead of the campaign that shows House Democrats' fiscal priorities and things that you guys might do to reduce the deficit?
Well, that didn't come up in our conversation earlier today. John Yarmuth, our chairman of the Budget Committee, made a brief presentation before introducing Bob Greenstein. But it's my expectation that there will continue to be an ongoing discussion about what the future looks like, particularly if there's a change in individual at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and advancing Democratic priorities. But that discussion hasn't taken place so far.
In that regard, you guys, you still got the For the People label in front of you. Are we going to see something like that from House Democrats, or are you going to wait to coordinate and sync up with whoever the nominee is in terms of an agenda?
Well, I think that's a question that remains to be seen in terms of what ultimately happens with whoever emerges as the nominee. But we as House Democrats are going to continue to advance our For the People agenda. We articulated it in advance of November of 2018 to indicate that were the American people to decide to give us an opportunity to govern in the majority, we would focus on priorities like lowering healthcare costs, fixing our crumbling infrastructure, and bringing our democracy to life for everyday Americans. Promise made, promise kept. And we're going to continue to advance that For the People agenda, which we believe is an agenda that is shared from a value standpoint by all of the individuals who are competing for our presidential nomination. Last question.
I'm curious, how would you assess the prospects for coming to agreement with this president on issues like prescription drug prices and infrastructure? What are the realistic chances that you actually could get something done with this president?
Well, that remains to be seen to the extent that President Trump is interested in trying to make life better for everyday Americans. We remain interested in trying to find common ground with President Trump whenever and wherever possible. House Democrats have found common ground with President Trump on criminal justice reform. We found common ground in strengthening the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. We found common ground in delivering for the American people paid family medical leave. That was a House Democratic initiative that will make life better for millions of Americans, including military families. So we remain committed to trying to find common ground, but the ball is in President Trump's court.
Cookie follow-up. The Senate has a prescription drug bill, a bipartisan bill. Are you willing to negotiate with the Senate and perhaps make some changes to H.R. 3?
We believe that H.R. 3 does provide the roadmap for trying to drive down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs and give the federal government the ability to use its bulk price purchasing power to negotiate lower drug prices on behalf of the American people. It's shocking that everyday Americans pay 5 or 6 times the amount that other developed countries, such as people in Canada or Australia or Great Britain, France, and Germany, pay for the same drug, often manufactured in the same location. We believe that the legislation that we have passed in the form of H.R. 3 helps to solve the problem as it relates to out-of-control drug pricing. To the extent that the Senate Republicans are interested in addressing this problem as well, I'm sure that we'll do everything possible to try to find common ground. But as Catherine indicated, we've sent over more than 400 bills to the Senate. Approximately 275 of those bills are bipartisan in nature, either in terms of co-sponsorship or in terms of securing Republican votes, such as our prescription drug pricing bill. And so the question is, does Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans really want to legislate on behalf of the American people? We hope that the answer is yes. Thank you.